everybody, it's Josie here. I'm going to be doing my wrap-up video today for the New Yearsathon readathon that I took part in. So this is the first readathon of the year. I came across this one by accident, but I really loved the challenges in it, and I thought I had quite a few books that would meet those challenges. And I wanted to kind of kick the reading year off on a high, and oh my goodness, I'm so happy I took part in this readathon because actually the books that I read were all great. There wasn't a bad book among them, which is amazing because sometimes I think if you start the reading year off on a bad note or a couple of kind of dud books, then it almost puts you into a bad mood or a bit of a reading slump, whereas I'm really happy because the books that I read, and I actually managed to get through all 5 challenges, which I'm quite proud of. I did have some time off from work at the beginning of the year, so I knew I was going to hopefully get through all of them, which I did. But they've really kind of kicked off my January in a really good way. So I had a great time with this readathon, and hopefully it'll be back next year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the books that I read, tell you what I thought of them, what I rated them, and also what challenges they were for. So the first one is this lovely book here. It's called Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. And this one was to pick a 5-star prediction. And oh my gosh, I was so happy with this book. Quite often, when you predict that you're going to really love something, it doesn't necessarily live up to that very high standard of hype. But this one is absolutely a 5-star read. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't some things that are not like, that didn't have some questions, but overall, it is a wonderful book, and it was also the first one I read for the year, so to start the year off with this one, I was so happy. The premise of this book is a research ship goes out to the Mariana Trench, and they're doing some research out there. Well, basically they were filming a mockumentary because there was a theory going around that there were mermaids to be found. So this ship was actually going out there, not actually believing that there were mermaids, but wanting to film a mockumentary. And then what happened to the ship is that it became a ghost ship. The entire crew disappeared, the ship was found floating, and when the footage was sent back, it looked like there may be real-life mermaids, the killer kind. But at the time, this footage was dismissed as fake as the production company wanting to get publicity. So what happens in this book, so that all happens, that's kind of the history of what happens, and then what happens in this book is that another ship gets sent out to the Mariana Trench to kind of reinvestigate these claims of mermaids. And I love sort of siren stories, and I love kind of dark siren stories, and this book was actually recommended by Murphy Napier, who loves siren stories, so that's why I kind of had high hopes for it, and it is fantastic. It is fun, it is wonderful, it has great queer romance in it as well, so I was happy. Lovely girl on girl romance, and it has a wonderful blend of kind of the science of marine biologists and then also kind of that horror thriller factor. So it is a fantastic book. I highly recommend this one. 5-star read, absolutely. Then the next challenge was to read a book that you were meaning to read in 2018. And for me, that was this gorgeous book here, Ink. So this fascinated me because I have a lot of ink on me. And the premise of the book sounded really interesting. So the premise is that in this, it's I guess I would call this a dystopian book. So in this kind of dystopian reality, the people have markings or tattoos, essentially, that tell their life story on their skin. And to be a blank or to not have tattoos is incredibly subversive and weird, and they're kind of considered evil. So it's almost, I love the premise that it kind of plays with the idea that when people were first getting tattooed, that was considered subversive and unacceptable, and only criminals and sailors get tattoos. And now obviously it's become a lot more mainstream. But I love that idea, and also the idea, and it's quite a dark version of this idea, is that when you die, your skin is then removed and put into a book that tells your life story. And this book, I don't want to give too much away of the plot because it's interesting. It tells the story of this girl whose father's died, and his skin has been removed, and she wants to be an inker, and what happens around that whole storyline. Now, and I really enjoyed this. I think it had some darker elements. It questions a lot of things. Again, it questions the nature of what we're told, what we believe. Can you really judge someone from the outside? It has a fairy tale element in it as well, which I really liked. So I really enjoyed this book. I think I actually enjoyed it more than I even thought I was going to. So I would say it's definitely a 4-star read, maybe even, yeah, a 4-star read on this one. I really enjoyed it. So that was a great one. Then the next one, so this challenge was you had to pick some books in certain positions off your shelf and then put all those in a jar and then kind of get a random book. And the one, weirdly, I picked out of the jar was The Accidental by Ali Smith. Again, one that I've been dying to read. It's been on my shelf for quite a long time. And this one is, it's really interesting. It's more slow paced. So unlike Into the Drowning Deep, for example, where there's a lot of twists and turns and action, this is basically about a family and they're on holiday in the kind of the English countryside, and this woman shows up. And each chapter is from a different character's perspective of how they're interacting with this woman, and she brings forth certain emotions, certain memories. They're each dealing with certain things that have gone on in their lives, that have happened, that have maybe gone wrong. And it's just an interesting meditation on how we deal with trauma, how we deal with what happens in our lives, how different people influence us and maybe give us slightly different perspective on it. So if you're looking for something that's very kind of plot and action driven, this is not it. But it did absolutely make me think, and it sort of speaks to the nature of humans and how we interact. So this 3.5 star read for me. But I really enjoyed that as well. Bit of a slower pace from the other one. Then the next one I've got here is this, The Beast is an Animal. So this was in the challenge to do an adaptation or a book that was going to be adapted. And again, this one surprised me on a number of levels. I don't think I sort of anticipated, or I thought the story was going to be something different. And so the premise is that there's these soul eaters that come into a town one night and kill all the adults and leave the children. And then what happens to these children and their kind of journey. But more than that, I found that this book, it was interesting because I love books on witchcraft and witches, and I didn't expect that in there, but I got that in this book as well. And for me, really, what I found quite disturbing was there was a lot of talk around women, women's position, religion, kind of the nature of sort of accusing women of being witches. There's some really dark elements that I would classify as child abuse. Again, how you fear other people, fear anything that's different. And that's kind of what I got from this book. So while, you know, the plot is good and there's obviously a driving plot and a storyline behind it, and this whole element of the beast and the soul eaters, but that kind of conversation on what's good and bad, the nature of what's good and bad, about female power as well, and how sometimes that people can be afraid of that. That's kind of what I got from this book, and I really enjoyed this. It's quite dark as well. I wasn't expecting it to be as dark as it was. So again, I think this is kind of on reflection, probably a 4-star read as well for me. I really enjoyed that. And then the last one is this little book over here. It's Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. So this was in the challenge to read a classic. And it fits in with my personal goals because I want to read a classic every month. So this is it for the month then. And I really enjoyed this book. I might actually do a separate video on it, but essentially you've got 10 people, they get invited to an island and they start dying. I really enjoyed it. Some of the, okay, so I did have some issues, and I will go into this a bit more in depth when I do an in-depth wrap up on this. There was some writing style issues, there were some wording issues that I had a problem with. I did have issues with it, but overall, kind of the way it ended and kind of the mystery element of it, I really enjoyed. So I would still give this 3.5 stars, definitely. But yes, it's also inspired me to possibly do maybe a retelling of this. Watch this space. But yeah, I enjoyed this as well. And this was the last book I read on the readathon. And like I said, I had a wonderful time with this readathon. So thank you to the hosts. I had a great time. I enjoyed it. May it come back next year. So that's my lot for today. Have a good rest of your day, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye bye.